The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a bonus show we have for you today. I think you're going to like this one. Robot cars. They are a real business. To everybody who's been emailing me for year after year saying, David, stop talking about autonomous vehicles. It will never be a thing. It's not going to happen. No, no, no. It's now a thing. Waymo One has launched their commercial robot ride-hailing service in Arizona. It's like Uber or Lyft. You summon a ride with a smartphone app, but the car will be driving itself. Only a few hundred customers will initially have access to the app and participate in these early sort of beta stages of the project. This company, Waymo One, is an arm of Alphabet, which is Google, right? That's Alphabet Inc. is now the parent company for Google. The cars will drive themselves, but for now, there will be a Waymo engineer, like a real person, sitting behind the wheel in case anything goes wrong. Obviously, at some point, the plan is for the engineers to go away, but Waymo isn't yet saying when that's going to be. The obvious question, Pat, is, would you get into one of these cars?
Oh, I absolutely would. I think that all these car sourcing apps are fantastic, right? Like Uber and Lyft. But the downside to them is that you're getting into a car with a stranger and he's trying to offer you candy and you may not like how he smells. You know, an autonomous car would get rid of a lot of those problems, and I would be one of the first to hop in one for sure.
Yeah, I would also get into one. I do think that for all the good things that Uber and Lyft do, it also is problematic in that it does drive down the wages of those who are driving people around by creating competition with taxis, and part of the savings comes from being underinsured. So there's a lot of problems with Uber and Lyft, but I see them not necessarily as problems that are going to be solved. I see them as problems that are going to be made irrelevant as human drivers increasingly go the way of the dodo, which maybe relates to our next story, which is the use of phrases that refer to animals in ways that PETA doesn't like. And this story, I've been paying very close attention to this story because I have a lot of animal activists that I'm friends with on social media, and they've been posting about this. PETA, which is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, it's a group that wants animals to be treated ethically, but often does things that I find counterproductive or kind of pointless or just simply disagree with in some ways. They have put out a list of phrases that they are equating to homophobia and racism. So here's an example. The phrase, kill two birds with one stone. They believe that that is a phrase that is equivalent to racism or homophobia, and that instead you should say, feed two birds with one scone. Okay? Another example. Be the guinea pig. People talk about when you do a test case, when someone's trying something out, you say, I'll be the guinea pig. And instead, they say you should use the phrase, be the test tube, as opposed to be the guinea pig. Beat a dead horse should instead be feed a fed horse, to point out that something is irrelevant because it's already been done, so to speak. Bring home the bacon is like racism or homophobia against pigs, and that instead it should be bring home the bagels. And take the bull by the horns should be replaced with take the flower by the thorns, which doesn't have the same bullfighting sort of imagery. So here's my view on this. Words matter, okay? How we talk about things absolutely connects to how those things are perceived in society, unconscious biases, etc., etc. There is no question about that. I think that where PETA went wrong is by equating the need to change those phrases to racism and homophobia. Saying bring home the bacon simply is not the same as referring to black people as the N-word or gay people as the F-word. The connotations are different, and I actually think you don't even need to debate the merits of it. Debate the pragmatics of it, and I think, Pat, that PETA loses more people when they make that equation, saying using these phrases is like racism or homophobia.
It's certainly not the same thing, especially because most non-human animals don't speak English, so they wouldn't understand something like this. I think their argument would be, though, that we want to make sure that animals are treated with dignity and respect, and if our vernacular even doesn't suggest that, then people aren't going to treat animals with dignity and respect because they think of them as lesser beings, as something that you can beat or something that you can, bring home or kill with a stone. I think that's how they would try to approach it. Now, that's not the position that I take. I think this is a little bit ridiculous. Like, there are just so many other problems that you can address first, and you can get to the language policing down the road. One could say that you have bigger fish to fry.
I completely agree. And, the thing about it is, for example, I'm an advocate of the reality that we should be reducing our meat consumption, period. It's going to have to happen. Environmentally, it's going to have to happen. Health-wise, it should happen. Am I going to convince more people, if I were trying to convince people to do that, would I get people to reduce meat consumption by explaining to them the environmental and health impact, or by saying, hey, if you eat meat, you probably also use phrases like be the guinea pig and kill two birds with one stone, and that's like racism and homophobia. It's almost like a false flag to get people to not take vegetarians and vegans seriously when they say stuff like this. Like, I just think it's a loss for the movement pragmatically.
Are there any like positive expressions that we have referring to animals that maybe they're in support of? Like, I can't think of any offhand, but yeah, I don't know, like something similar to like "you're as nice as a dog." Obviously, that's not an expression that we use, but
no, actually, that's one that came to mind. Think about it. If you say this, this phone is so useful. This is like man's best friend, which of course refers to dogs. That's a positive connotation.
Well, is that acceptable though? Because I mean, if you're against the negative stereotyping and language, should you also be opposed to the positive? Because that's how we would treat an issue of race or an issue of like sexism or homophobia or any of that sort of thing.
I would suggest asking someone who likes this list, because that's definitely not me. I think that this is totally counterproductive. And I for a long time, PETA has been choosing the wrong spots, would be the way I would say it. And I know that there are people in our audience who disagree, but I anticipate hearing from them. I think that this is just bad strategy. I don't think you're going to convince people with this.
I earlier said they have bigger fish to fry. I think in the future I'm going to use they have better quiche to try, although quiche isn't always made totally vegan, so maybe I'll have to come up with something else.
I've never heard of vegan quiche, because quiche, by definition, quiche has eggs and cheese. That's what makes it a quiche. Otherwise, it's just vegetables.
Well, we can find another emulsifier to replace the eggs, and we can find some sort of cashew alternative for the cheese, and there you go. You have a vegan quiche.
Sounds delicious. I'll get right on finding a place in Boston that offers that. Okay, Pat, you are now fighting with people regularly. You're taking jiu-jitsu classes. How did you start doing this? Have you gotten beaten up yet, or is that not how it works?
Okay. Why did I start doing it? I don't know. I guess I just like enjoy that sort of combat sport element, exploring that. I grew up doing a lot of karate and kickboxing, but never did any sort of ground fighting stuff. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do it. Also, just learning self-defense, growing confidence, exercise, staying in shape. Those are really the reasons why I decided to approach it. And also, I just wanted to start a new journey, pick up a new hobby. And I've been doing this for a couple weeks now, and I have to say I am really enjoying it.
What kind of belt do you have right now?
Oh, I have a white belt. Everyone starts out at a white belt, of course. And actually, there are only 5 belts, and the progression takes a long time. So, like, it'll be over a year until I get my next belt, which is totally fine. Like, that's not the thing I'm focused on. It's more about acquiring the skills.
Of course. It's like in chess, it's not about your rating. It's about just learning the game and understanding it or something like that, right? The same type of thing. It's not about the belt or the score.
Do people know what jiu-jitsu is, though? Like, I understand, maybe they understand it's like a martial art, but I think that's where it stops for most people.
Well, explain it. I mean, so how would it differ from, like, I guess I don't even really know. So my only experience with martial arts is karate when I was a kid, and in that there was basically no grappling of any kind, at least not at the level where I achieved. Jiu-jitsu is a lot more of that, right?
Right. So jiu-jitsu is ground fighting. If you ever watch the MMA or like the UFC, it's the elements, taking away the striking, just sort of grappling, fighting on the ground, going for submissions, going for chokes and joint locks, that sort of thing. The goal is to try to tap out the opponent. And it's sort of like chess in a sense, because there are like these certain strategies that you have. You try to acquire certain dominant positions, and based on how people are maneuvering their limbs, you can sort of like catch them and basically stay a few moves ahead of them and try to eventually tap the person out. And so that's why I like it, because it's essentially more of a mind game than anything else. Like a smaller, more skilled opponent can easily defeat a larger, unskilled opponent. And unfortunately, that's what's been happening to me, because I tend to be bigger than the people that I'm rolling with, sparring with. Is another way to put it, because I'm like kind of long and somewhat strong. But I just get completely demolished by these people who have been doing it for several months or up to a year, because I just don't know what I'm doing. And that's totally fine, because it's part of the learning process. But it just goes to show how amazing the art really is. It is one of those arts where, like, it's like the, those Bruce Lee films where, like, the smaller guy can defeat the bigger guy. Jiu-jitsu is actually that in practice.
Now, when it comes to the merits of jiu-jitsu for actual self-defense, one of the critiques I've seen about many martial arts is that they teach people to function in self-defense within a very narrow construct. Like in the case you're talking about, it's grappling and floor fighting sort of situation, where most actual self-defense situations are not actually going to lend themselves to, for example, what you learn in karate or what you learn in jiu-jitsu. Is that a fair criticism in your mind so far, or is that not a fair criticism?
So certain martial arts are more effective than others. The most effective martial art is MMA, pulling everything together. But when you talk about MMA, the predominant elements of that are jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, which is like Thai kickboxing, essentially. Jiu-jitsu is actually very, very practical, because if you were an unskilled person, you may know how to throw some haymakers, right? You still know kind of how to strike. But if I'm an expert at jiu-jitsu and you don't know any sort of ground fighting, I can take you down and like easily achieve a dominant position in the fight and win the fight. That's sort of like the goal behind it. And we've seen that in practice. Like the very first UFCs were all won by jiu-jitsu guys, because these other karate guys and sumo wrestlers and kickboxers, they just had no familiarity with the ground at all. And eventually MMA kind of formed into this thing where people understand jiu-jitsu and they understand standing up and sparring and throwing strikes and all that stuff. You have to have all elements of that. And luckily I'm at an MMA gym, so I can continue my striking progress if I'd like to. I'm not so much interested in that, because I want to make sure that my head doesn't get smashed in. Like, I don't want to get too much brain damage from doing all this stuff. But that is a road I can go down if I choose to pursue it.
Yeah, that seems like a good thing to avoid, getting the head smashed in. I sort of agree with you on that. So we'll be hearing more, I'm sure, from Pat about his jiu-jitsu journey. That's kind of hard to say. Jiu-jitsu journey.
Tough word.
And yeah,
and
that
you know,
does it for today.
I was just gonna say, so when we hit 2,000 patrons, the idea is that we're going to have a chess match. It's going to be Max and me versus you in chess. Did you know that when we hit 3,000 patrons, it's actually going to be a David versus Pat jiu-jitsu match? That would incentivize a lot of people to join up.
I didn't know that, and it's news to me, I guess, quite literally. But we will talk about that off air after we removed this part from the bonus show this will be edited out, as people like to say. That's it for today. We will talk to you on the Friday show and then next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.